Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Oren, and I am going to be discussing magic without tools. Um, so all of this material is based on my newly published book, Psychic Witch, which is available in paperback, audiobook, Kindle. So if you enjoy the discussion, the topics of this, definitely buy it, help a brother out. So the first thing I want to touch upon is the idea of psychic ability and magic. So why would psychic ability be important when it comes to magic in general? A lot of people who practice magic, whether they be witches or some sort of ceremonial magician, tend to kind of gloss over the importance of developing psychic ability. So my whole premise and my deeply held belief is that magic and psychic ability are two sides of the same coin. You can't necessarily separate them. So we can look at psychic ability as the reception of subtle information and being able to interpret and understand that on a basic in a similar manner, we can simplify the idea of magic as magic being that information that we are projecting out into our reality to inform it. So it's sort of like the difference between hearing and seeing. Both deal with audio waves, right? It's just a matter of if you're listening, if you're receiving them, or if you're sending them out. But if you can do both, it's going to enhance your ability to dialogue, to have conversation. So there is an idea within not just magical communities, but New Age communities and psychic communities as well, that psychic ability is something that you're born with, that it's some sort of a gift that certain people have. And while, some people can be naturally inclined to be more psychically sensitive, it's not that different than some people being kind of naturally artistically inclined or naturally inclined to sports. That doesn't necessarily mean that, if you aren't born with that you can't develop that. And it's important to understand that psychic ability is a birthright. Everybody has psychic ability. One of the things that I have a very strong opinion about is the idea of the term extrasensory perception. So extrasensory perception tends to be the term that is used for psychic ability. And the whole notion behind that is that it's this idea that it's our senses extended, right? So this is based on the clairs. So it's like hearing becomes clairaudience because it's extended. Sight becomes clairvoyance because it's extended, so on and so forth. But I actually think that kind of hinders people in regards to embracing their full psychic potential. Because I don't believe that it's extrasensory. I believe that our psychic abilities are our natural abilities as spiritual entities. Before we incarnate and have a physical body, we are spirit. After we pass over, we are spirit as well. So, when we're spirit, these things that we kind of deem as psychic senses, as extrasensory, are not necessarily extra. They're natural to how the spirit operates and communicates and perceives. And that's why mediumship, in regards to speaking to spirits, relates to this idea of, using that psychic ability to be able to communicate and perceive that. So I believe that when we kind of talk about extrasensory perception as something that is, extra. So it's sort of like calling magic supernatural. When you realize when you engage in magic that idea kind of hinders you from using magic, right? Because magic is natural, it's not supernatural. I believe the same is done with extrasensory perception. So I believe it's something that everyone can engage in. I think it's something that is our natural birthright. I think it's something that also enhances our magic and can be used as a magic modality on its own. Excuse me. So the next kind of thing I want to slide into is this idea of materialism. So, you know, being a witch, I love all my witchy things, right? Like I love my tools, I love my ingredients, I love all those sensual things that compose, you know, traditional spellcraft. However, you know, what would we do if we didn't have those tools? What would we do if we were lost at sea or stranded on an island, right? How would we be able to perform magic without any tools? A trend that I've seen, despite how much, you know, just like the next witch, I love my magical tools and items and ingredients. I think that witches can tend to get kind of stuck and hung up on the material aspect of witchery. And I think that actually kind of hinders people in regards to their magical results, as well as their magical progress as well. So I have met so many witches, that myself included, that you know, initially believe that you need to spend all this money to be able to perform magic, to be able to perform witchcraft, right? I've met people who say, I can't afford to be a witch, I can't afford all the tools, all the ingredients. And I did this too when I was young, and I got into the craft. You know, I thought, you know, I need to go get a chalice, I need to go get an athame, I need to go get a robe. You know, it's a long list, and it ends up adding up to hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. But again, what happens if we don't have access to those things? What happens when if something were to happen and we were to become disabled somehow? So how would we cast a circle if we can't walk a full circle? And this is where psychic ability comes in, and developing those psychic tools as super important. A lot of early occultists put a very strong emphasis on the idea of mind and consciousness when it comes to magic. And you'll see this also in a lot of classical definitions of magic itself. So for example, you know, we're all familiar with the really famous Crowley definition of magic being the science of the art of, you know, using will with conformity with will. And then Dion Fortune added that, you know, it's all about altering your consciousness in that process. We can go back even further to occultists like Agrippa, who wrote the famous 4 books of occultism, which I believe Llewellyn publishes in beautiful big books, which those books are sort of a strong foundation of Western traditional magic. And Agrippa was also very strong on the idea that, you know, magic is internal. So, you know, he mentions that, you know, yes, some people can naturally commune with spirits, some people can naturally do magic, but it's all about kind of tuning into that inner mental realm. And we can even go back further, which ties back into modern occultism. So a lot of our modern occultism, particularly witchcraft, Wicca, stuff of that nature, comes from or is influenced strongly by ceremonial traditions that are considered hermetic, that are based on Hermeticism. So Hermeticism is, long story short, it's sort of this hybrid in Greece of like Greco and Egyptian thought put together. And the collection of those words are called, of those ideas is called the Hermetica. And one of the important pieces of the Hermetica is something called the Emerald Tablet. So the Emerald Tablet is where we get the idea of as above, so below, but it continues to say as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. So there's this sort of notion that what we can do internally can affect our external world. When I was a little boy, I used to, my first exposure to magic was mainstream media, like a lot of people, right? So movies, books, fairy tales, things of that nature. And the magic in that is very otherworldly, right? So a lot of it is saying a word or making a gesture or thinking a thought, and some sort of magic occurs. And then you enter into witchcraft and you tend to find, oh, that's not necessarily how magic works. But I've kind of come back full circle to say that, yes, it is. So where do I want to go with this? So psychic senses and magical senses tend to be along the same brainwave states. So there was a study that was done many years ago with the, I can't think of the word, but it's like those electrode things, right? And they took psychics, they took shamans, they took faith healers, they took people who said that they had a special ability, and they hooked them up to this. And they realized that when these people engaged in these practices, that their brainwave pattern started ranging between 7.8 and 8 hertz in cycles. And this was a study that was conducted by a man named Robert Beck. Sorry, I got tongue-tied a little bit. So what's interesting about that is that we start to see this pattern of this idea of a certain state of consciousness that is connected to both healing, magic, and psychic ability. And that brainwave state, that cycle of hertz that Robert Beck is describing, is referred to as the alpha brainwave state. So the alpha brainwave state is the state that is associated with imagination. So the state I'm in right now is referred to as beta. So this is like normal consciousness. This is being alert, being awake, talking, thinking, things of that nature. Alpha is associated with daydreaming. It's associated with forming mental pictures in your mind. It's sort of like when you're really engaged in a good novel and you start kind of seeing it, you start to get immersed into it, you start slipping into that alpha brainwave state. So, a lot of magic that I have been trained in, different branches of witchcraft traditions and such, put a strong emphasis on building that psychic foundation and being able to perform magic without tools. And a lot of that has to deal with imagination. And imagination is sort of the key to both psychic ability and witchcraft. And I know that sounds sort of silly, but it's true. Both on their own are not enough. Just daydreaming something is not necessarily psychic ability. Just visualizing something is not magic. It's a little bit more complex than that. However, being able to train yourself to enter those states on command can help you at least be on the right path to be able to do those things. So the way you differentiate psychic ability with just your imagination is through meditation. It's through getting to know yourself, getting to know how your imagination works, how your mind works, and you begin to discern it. The difference between visualization and projective magic has to deal with willpower. So a lot of witches I come across put a strong emphasis on this idea of intent. And I think for the most part, I disagree with that, because a lot of times, you can intend something. That doesn't mean it's going to necessarily happen. Willpower is a little bit different, where it's more of a refusal of anything else. So, for example, a great illustration, and I always go back to this because this is one of my gateways into witchcraft, was the movie The Craft. So in the movie The Craft, there's the scene where the four girls are sort of out and about, and, this homeless man is chasing them, this kind of crazy homeless man with a snake. And they all turn around and a car hits them, right? And they're all sort of like, oh, I was thinking it. Were you thinking it? And so like in that, though it seems like kind of a weird, random, like, ooh, magic scene, there's sort of an insight in that, because they weren't just thinking it, they were willing it to happen. So that is my little spiel on the difference between intention and willpower when it comes to projective magic. The next thing that I have sort of discussed in my book, something that I realized, is that traditional ritual and traditional spell all follows a format that is in alignment with the classical planes of reality, which happen to also be our auric field, right? So the different layers of our auric field, which is not necessarily as linear as we're thinking, but it puts this idea that we're multidimensional beings, right? So, our astral body, for example, exists on the astral plane. It's a part of us that is on the astral plane, even though our focus is here. So what I have uncovered is that traditional ritual within witchcraft and traditional spell work tends to follow a format. And if you look at that format, it's touching on different key components of moving things through your auric field and therefore through the planes of reality, and then receiving it back. So there's a technique, there's a method to the madness. It's not just necessarily fully visualizing things and putting willpower behind that, though that definitely can work. But there is something to say about the science aspect of the definition of magic, as well as the art. The science being, the tried and true, proven kind of mechanics of how the magic works, and the art being sort of, your own flavor, your own style, your own expression and connection to your magic and to the universe. Something that I found, not to keep tangenting too much, something that I found that was really interesting is that a lot of magical folk tend to be very earth-based, right? So when we think of paganism and we think of witchcraft and Wicca, we often have nature-based connotations to that, right? So what's really interesting about that, which I also talk about in the book, is that the surface of our planet, in the ionosphere, it has an electromagnetic rhythm based on lightning activity, which forms sort of a cavity in our atmosphere, but it pulses and it cycles. And a lot of scientists and researchers have compared it to being very similar to the process of brainwave activity. And this cycle is called the Schumann resonance. So what's really interesting about the Schumann resonance is that when it's in hertz, it's 7.83 hertz, which is exactly within that range of alpha, right? So there's this weird connection between being able to connect with the earth and slipping into that stream of consciousness and the energy of magic and psychic ability. It all sort of follows into the same realm. So to be able to do, magic without tools, one of the most important things is meditation. And meditation is something that a lot of witches are resistant to. And I totally get that, because I was super resistant to it in my initial training as well. I don't want to sit there and just, focus on my breath or focus on one thing. I want to be casting spells and stuff of that nature. But meditation is so crucial that it became part of the subtitle of my book, Psychic Witch, A Metaphysical Guide to Meditation, Magic, and Manifestation. Because that meditation helps you to not only be able to focus, to make your will singular, but it can also help you be able to visualize and enhance those things. So with psychic ability and this brainwave state, right? One of the things that I teach is psychic prompts. So a psychic prompt is essentially a Pavlovian trigger to enter the state of the alpha on command. So the Pavlovian trigger is based on Pavlov. I forgot his first name, but a famous scientist named Pavlov who conducted an experiment with dogs. And he found that when he fed the dogs, he would ring a bell, right? And then he stopped feeding the dogs and he'd ring the bell and they would start naturally engaging in behavior that was associated with eating food. So they learned to associate that sound with a certain way of conducting themselves and a certain way of thinking. So we can set up those very same type of psychic prompts when it comes to entering the alpha brainwave state of activity by engaging in meditation that helps us slip into the alpha brainwave state and setting that trigger. So that when you are out and about, you don't have to sit and do like a full meditation and fully immerse yourself. You can just, do your psychic prompt and slip into that and be able to manifest your reality based on what it's going to do. So this can be used several ways. So magic can be done in sort of a totally internal manner that is more meditation based, which is, sort of sitting down at your altar and meditating, and then, visualizing the tools and conducting the ritual and willing it out into the universe. That is absolutely a form of magic without tools. But we can also do that while out and about and awake. So one of the examples that I give, I believe I touch on this in the book, is so I used to work every October at Enchanted, which is Laurie Cabot's witchcraft shop in Salem. And I think it was Halloween, or it was really close to that on one of the nights, where we're just exhausted, completely exhausted. Everyone in the shop is exhausted, and we get tourists from all over. People who are into witchcraft, people who are into psychic ability, to people who are just tourists and they're not into any of this, and it's sort of just a touristy kind of freak show thing for them. So we were about to close shop, but we can't close shop until everyone leaves. And this family had come in that was super rowdy and totally disrespectful. They didn't believe in any of the stuff. They were making fun of it. But there were a lot of them. There were like 10 of them. And we couldn't close the shop unless they left. But we also, since we were not the owners, who was not present, we can't tell them to leave. So being a little bit like smug and arrogant, I pulled a coworker to the back and I asked, "Have you seen the movie Labyrinth?" And he's like, "Of course I've seen the movie Labyrinth." And I was like, "Do you remember the cleaners?" So in the movie The Labyrinth, with David Bowie, there's this scene where she's running through an underground dungeon, right? And all of a sudden, this huge drill thing starts kind of chasing her down the corridor. And he's like, yeah, I remember that. So I was like, watch this. So I did the psychic magic, which I explained in my book. And I did a gesture with it. So I just went like this and like that. And you would have to see it to believe it. But they all like they were being pushed out, because I was visualizing and willing that cleaner pushing them out of the store, just sort of compacting it and moving them on. So, we can do magic without tools in that sense. We can also use our psychic ability to enhance the magic that we're doing. And this is why the development of the clairs is so important. And in my book, I discuss how to develop every single clair. So you'll have some people who are like, "Oh, I'm clairvoyant, but I'm not clairaudient." You're all of them. It's just about awakening that and working on it and developing it. So an example would be if I'm doing a love spell for someone, right? So if I'm doing a spell so that someone has love come into their life, not targeted at anyone, but just that love comes into their life, right? So the ritual may involve like a pink candle or whatever. So the way that I would enhance it is I would impose each of those clairs onto the magical working itself, and that would strengthen it. So what I mean by that is, I would envision like roses blooming out of the candle. I would hear music that I associate with love. I would conjure up smells and textural feelings that I associate with love, and I would infuse that into the candle as part of the charging. So yeah, that is why psychic ability is so important, and it's something I want to bring back to the forefront of witchcraft, and particularly early witchcraft training, because a lot of the things that we see as basic aren't really explored in depth. So energetic practices like grounding and centering and shielding and developing these psychic abilities, we just kind of check it off the list, like we've done it, and then we move on, whether that's through a lot of traditional witchcraft training or whether that's through reading a book, and you want to get to the good stuff. But it's important to really build on that foundation, because it really is the foundation of all magical workings and all magical acts. So yeah, I think it's time to open it up to questions. So if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. What are the tools behind me? These ones, you mean? So these ones are actually, I have tingshas, which are hanging. That's just for meditation. I also use that for like energy clearing stuff. And those are actually dowsing rods. So dowsing rods are funny. My dad is one of the most psychic people I've ever met. And he's one of the most like amazingly magical people I've ever met. But he does not consider himself psychic, and he would like totally hate the word witch, right? But he totally is. So my dad runs a plumbing company, and when they can't find a leak with their tools underground, he will wait till no one's looking, and he has a pair of coat hangers that he'll go out and find the leak. So, that inspired me to get dowsing rods. Okay, so one of the questions is, how can we build our own psychic ability in general, like brain exercises? That is a great question. So the book that I was talking about, Psychic Witch, this has 93 exercises in it. And all of that, all of the beginning of the book, let's see if I can open it up. So up till chapter... Actually, the whole thing, it just kind of interweaves, but you start off by learning how to relax. So there's all these different exercises on how to relax and how to enter the alpha brainwave state. And then after that, it goes into all of like the crucial points of like how to hold that trigger, how to do protection, how to ground to make sure that you haven't fried yourself. And then from there, it goes into the developing of all the clairs. So there's exercises on how to awaken and strengthen each one of those clairs, whether it's clairvoyance or clairaudience. And then it starts moving into kind of more of the psychic magic stuff. So once you've kind of learned how to enter the alpha brainwave state on command, and once you're able to work and develop these psychic abilities, from there you can reverse engineer it to be that kind of projective instead of receptive. But it's sort of like how, going back to my metaphor of language, right? So of speaking and hearing, we learn to speak from hearing. So opening those psychic senses, learning to be receptive and engage in them is going to vastly strengthen our magical ability in general. Okay, so the question is, do you think people who daydreamed a lot as kids have an advantage when learning meditation, or do you think that skill is better applied to visualization? So I think children is a whole nother topic that I discuss, which is related to brainwaves as well. But I think it's an advantage when it comes to the visualization part of the process. When it comes to the straightforward building that meditation practice and that focus, you completely want to dismiss any sort of visualization or daydreaming while doing it. So I've met a lot of people that part of their resistance is they're like, oh, I can't meditate because my mind keeps wandering. I just can't focus, right? And as I explain in my book, that misses the point completely. The meditation process of focusing your mind, when you get distracted, when you start visualizing things, that's part of the process. That is you meditating. The whole point is learning when your mind wanders and learning how to bring it back to focus. So it's very much like lifting weights in a gym, right? So like we don't say that weight's too heavy, I can't lift it. You start with lighter weights and you work your way up to it. And part of that resistance is that mind wandering. So you're not going to become good at focusing in meditation without your mind wandering. So a lot of people sort of beat themselves up because their mind wanders, when really that's the point of mindful meditation, is being aware of that and then bringing it back, which makes you better and stronger at that. Okay, so a question is, how do you rebuild skills? Oh no, my thing just slid. Let's see if we have any other questions. Okay, so a lot of these questions are about like, how do I develop, these visualization skills or these brainwave skills or these psychic abilities or things of that nature. And I hate to be so salesman-y, but really there's 93 exercises that take you from knowing nothing about psychic ability, nothing about meditation, nothing about magic, and build you all the way up to being adept in those skills. So if you are interested and curious, I am going to be salesman-y. So you can buy my book pretty much anywhere, local occult shops, Llewellyn.com. I sell signed copies at mattoren.com. Like I said, it's also on Kindle and Audible. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And thank you, Llewellyn, for hosting me.